Alone follows a woman driving alone across the country. Along the way, she finds herself constantly coming across the same man. Is it just a coincidence that he keeps showing up? Or is there something more sinister going on? I stumbled upon Alone recently while browsing the free movies section in YouTube of all places. And I have to say, for a free movie on YouTube, I was impressed. The woman here is Jessica, and even though the man that she keeps crossing paths with seems friendly enough, Jessica can't help but be cautious around him, and she basically does everything she can to avoid him altogether, even going so far as to leave him stranded on the side of the road when he seems to be broken down and injured.
Sorry, I've got to go.
It's just gonna take a minute.
I've got to go. I'm late for a meeting. I'm sorry.
But is there really anything to be worried about? Or does she actually have a reason to be paranoid? She is, after all, alone. So heads up here, this video will contain spoilers. The movie has a lot of twists and turns, and I can't help reviewing it without revealing some of these standout moments. So if you haven't seen it, pause this review and go check it out. Did I mention it's free on YouTube? So early in her trip, Jessica comes across a Jeep that's going way too slow. While trying to pass, the Jeep speeds up and forces her into oncoming traffic where she narrowly avoids a head-on collision. The driver of the Jeep then tailgates her for a while before finally exiting the highway. And right away, I'm already getting Duel vibes. The main character there has a similar altercation while trying to pass a large truck. The driver of the truck then stalks the man for the rest of the movie, trying to run him off the road and kill him. What's interesting about Duel, though, is we never actually see the driver. It's the greasy, grimy old truck that is portrayed as the villain. And that's kind of what I was expecting here. Even though a Jeep isn't exactly the most threatening vehicle on the road, it still felt like it presented enough danger for a woman traveling all alone. Well, here, those expectations changed when we're fairly quickly introduced to the driver. He approaches Jessica in a parking lot, and he apologizes for his behavior. And like his Jeep, he doesn't seem especially threatening, but there's still something about him that makes Jessica feel uneasy, and she hurries away without really saying much in return. As her road trip continues, though, this guy and his Jeep keep popping up. He keeps coming at her with his friendly demeanor, but the fact that he's always there only makes Jessica that much more suspicious of him. Now, up to this point, I didn't know what his intentions were, and I didn't know if Jessica's actions were over the top or justified, and I kind of liked it that way. I enjoyed the suspense of not knowing who the real villain was. Was Jessica onto something about the man, or was she being rude and presumptive? Now, it didn't take long for everything to be made clear. One night, a flat tire forces Jessica onto the side of the road. After she realizes her tire was actually slashed, guess who just so happens to show up? She wakes up the next morning locked in the basement of a cabin in the middle of the woods. It's there that the man reveals to her that she isn't even his first victim. So at this point, I readjusted my expectations and settled in for a movie about a woman held captive in the middle of nowhere, and I was waiting to see how she'd come up with an escape plan. That didn't take long, though, because in the very next scene, she gets a key and lets herself out. So now I had to readjust my expectations all over again for a movie about a woman on the run from a crazy serial killer somewhere in the middle of the forest. The 3 acts of this movie are so distinct from one another, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Even though I had to periodically readjust my expectations for what I felt the movie was going for, the story remained solid and clear. Man chases woman. Man captures woman. Woman escapes into the woods where she eventually fights back. But since each act had such a unique setting and tone, it did feel a bit like I was watching 3 different movies. If it had stayed the course and just been about a woman on a road trip, maybe being stalked by some man whose intentions were unclear, I'd have been okay with that. If it had been about a woman locked in a basement planning some elaborate escape, I would have been okay with that too. What we ended up getting, though, was more of a cat and mouse chase in the forest. And ultimately, I was okay with that. Blending all of these elements together into one film, I think, is a real strength. It was the constant shifting and subverting of expectations that kept its momentum so consistent. I enjoyed it from the start, and by the time it finished, it felt like hardly any time passed.
I am coming for you.
By the way, if you're enjoying this review so far, I wanted to invite you to check out my second channel where I live stream popular video games like Mario Wonder and Baldur's Gate 3. Right now I'm having a blast playing Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. Oh my gosh, there's so much going on. Oh, my fingers are doing like gymnastics. If you prefer your live streams through Twitch, I can also be found there. So don't be shy, come through and hang out. I'd love to chat with you. The last thing I wanted to address is the title of the movie and what you might think it means. On the surface, it's easy to attribute the title Alone to Jessica. She's the one traveling all alone. She's the one who has to rescue herself from her situation all alone. Not to mention, she's the very first person you see in the very first scene of the movie. And wouldn't you know it, she's framed perfectly, all alone. Also, I didn't mention this, but the whole reason she's moving across the country in the first place is because her husband just passed away. And as a widow, she's, once again, alone. So it makes sense to think that this movie's all about her. But there's an interesting scene about halfway through that made me reconsider. Just before she escapes from the cabin, Jessica hides in a closet. And it's there that she overhears the man talking on the phone with his wife and daughter. And it's in that moment when we realize this man is living two lives. In one life, he has a wife, he has a daughter, he seems to be happily married, he even seems to have a pretty good job. It isn't until he's away from his family, when he's all alone, that we see who he really is. And we actually see both sides of this man leading up to this conversation. When Jessica first meets him, he seems nice enough. He even offers her an apology and a nice smile, but that's the side of him that he chooses to show in public. It isn't until he's finally alone with Jessica that he reveals himself to her. We all adjust our behavior in public. Those adjustments might change a little depending on if you're with your family or your friends or at work, but they all do the same thing. They hide some part of who you really are. Now, if you're a well-adjusted person, I'd like to think that who you decide to show yourself to be in public has a lot of overlap with who you really are. In the case of this man, however, nothing of who he presents himself to be is who he actually is. He presents himself as someone who's friendly, even going so far as to put on a reassuring smile. Alone, however, he is the opposite. And that, to me, is the most chilling part of this movie. We're not just watching a woman's fight for survival all alone. We're diving into the more psychological aspect of being alone, which I think is far more terrifying. I mean, how well can you really know someone? Thanks for watching, everyone. Like and subscribe for more reviews just like this one. And don't forget to check out my live streams on my second channel as well as on Twitch. Bye-bye. I'm telling you, you think you know a guy. That is until you see him all alone.
Too bad about Kenny, huh? Life in a big city.